Welcome to my channel. My name is Luigi. I'm launching and starting to live stream here in YouTube and Twitch with the idea of start engaging in political commentary of things, news, political events going on here in the United States, but also internationally. There is always things going on. Things are very hectic and a lot of tensions and different phenomena that are interesting to follow and organize around. Most of my ideas come from myself, being a socialist and activist for almost 15, 18 years. And I'm also a member of Left Voice, so a lot of my ideas are coming from the organizing that we do in the United States, but also part of our international current. A lot of our content is not only in English, but also in Izquierda Diario. That you can find things in Spanish or in countries in Europe and others. So the idea is to, especially now with all the interest in socialism and the need to fight against Trump, to engage in this political debate. So that includes, the phenomena around Mamdani. I'm based here in Brooklyn, New York City. The hundreds of thousands who has been supporting his campaign with the idea of improving our lives, improving our working conditions, and expectation of fighting against the status quo, against the far right. Also debates on how we fight for reforms, how we continue fighting against the genocide and occupation in Gaza, how to fight to defend our democratic rights, improve our working conditions, organizing unions. There are, so many things going on here in the US and many ways to engage in fighting back. And the idea is to provide an opinion, a view from a socialist and revolutionary perspective. So if you are interested in these topics, you can join, comment, subscribe to my channel. The links are on my bio. And something that sparked me to start right now with this has been all the debates that happen around Zohran and Trump's meeting. We have done posts in Instagram, in Left Voice channel, but also my own channel, my own Instagram account, and a lot of likes, shares, positive comments, but also a lot of questions, debates. So I thought that it would be good to go into a space where I can develop more the approach, the contradictions that we see, the limits, and the negative aspects of this meeting. What is expressed is strategic consequences. So, yes, if you are interested in this, go to my links in bio. I'm gonna post this video on YouTube so that you can watch it even after the live stream. So hope to see you there. And for everyone who is right now, the idea is gonna be to go through the debate, this debate, and I will see if I can show you right now. On Instagram, I did this post that created, all these conversations, and also on the voice. We have been paying attention to the last moves done by Mamdani, for example, the endorsing Hakeem Jeffries, this idea of organizing for socialism, the Democrats voting to denounce the supposed order of socialism, what's going on with NYPD and ICE, and especially this, the moment where Trump and Mamdani shake hands, which for us that doesn't confront his reactionary agenda, but kind of normalized the far right, Trump. We also had a post, against Jessica Tisch, who was confirmed again as the current police commissioner. And all this has sparked debates. Well, this one was more positive. But especially here, people bringing up this, well, but this is government. This means to be part of doing politics. We need these alliances. And, so, a lot of the more reformist approach and pragmatic around how to govern, how to fight for socialism, how to navigate contradictions, how to handle the far right, different perspectives has appeared there. And instead of going to the meeting itself between Trump and Zohran Mamdani, I thought it would be good to go through this interview, because the whole meeting with Trump is like a half an hour video. This one is shorter and kind of goes straight to the point. And I'm sure a lot of people who is seeing this, we are against Trump, against his far right agenda, against his attacks on immigrants and oppressed minorities, his attacks on education, attacks on the public sector, against unions, calling out his international policies in the Middle East, what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, etc. So in this case, I wanted to focus more on the approach that Zohran is taking. So I think in this interview, he kind of go to the meat in many of the questions that were brought up by the host in NBC News. So the idea is to go through it and point some of the contradictions, always in the framework that understanding that this is a phenomenon that involves all the movement that got elected. Mamdani goes beyond his figure, expresses something, a movement in New York City, but also has repercussions in other places. People who is tired of our living conditions, who are tired of the status quo, who wants to fight the far right, who doesn't trust the Democratic Party, or political as usual, is looking for something new that has, that is pro-Palestine, that is against the genocide, that takes into account the lives of the working class, and that it feels some kind of, hope and something fresh after, seeing Trump in power. So there are a lot of expectations, and it's good to see that people wants to engage in the fight against inflation and all the things that are making our lives and the economy harder for the working class, with positive ideas, calling out the rich, calling out the far right. So, but one thing is, once you are in power, how you navigate those things and what are the contradictions and the limits that so-called democratic socialists has to deal with in this position, and the contradictions of being in the Democratic Party, the different forces that you have to reckon with. So I think this interview kind of goes to a lot of those issues. So I'm going to start playing it, and I'm going to do some comments through it.
And joining me now is the mayor-elect of New York City, Zohran Mamdani. Mr. Mayor-elect, welcome back to Meet the Press, and congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be back.
Well, it is wonderful to have you here in person, fresh off of your first meeting with President Donald Trump. He praised you. He even said you could do a great job as mayor despite months of a bitter back and forth. Were you surprised by the warm welcome that you got?
You know, I was looking forward to having the meeting with the president to speak about the needs of the 8.5 million people who call the same city we love home. and to speak frankly about the affordability crisis that is pushing so many of them out of those 5 boroughs. And I found in the meeting that I had with the president a productive one, and a meeting that came back again and again to the central themes of the campaign that we ran: the cost of housing, cost of childcare, the cost of groceries, the cost of utilities. And it showed that this is an opportunity to now start to deliver so that people can do more than just aspire to struggle in New York City, but actually to be able to live there.
But did you expect it to be so?
I love that part. So now to start, something that I have been noticing in his speech is the needs of all New Yorkers, the needs of the 8.5 million people who live in New York City. And that already has, a specific connotation. It's not talking about the working class, the unemployed, the oppressed people, even professionals, activists being attacked, etc. Is everyone. And that, among those 8.5 million people, we have here in the Big Apple around almost 400,000 millionaires, which some of them are billionaires, and they are going richer and richer. New York City is home to Wall Street, major corporations like BlackRock, Morgan Chase, Citigroup. So that sector does not have the same life than the million of people who is living in poverty, which becoming unhoused is a constant threat. Like the contrast between those two sectors is huge. So governing for all, that already talks about certain alliances and bringing sectors that are, capitalists, bourgeois, rich, millionaires, billionaires, whatever you want to call them, in the same content than the working class. So they are the same. The needs are not the same. And when we say, when he says that this was a productive meeting, no, it was a meeting with someone who himself called a fascist, that is someone who is in the far right, who is authoritarian, who has been attacking immigrants across the country, in the border, that has installed fear in immigrant communities, in families. They don't send kids to school. They fear of the relatives not being able to come back home or suddenly disappear. Attacks on public sector, attacks on education, on healthcare, on democratic rights. It's attacks all the line. So how you can meet with this person who then you can say, oh, we have a productive meeting, and that already we're gonna see this through the interview, but that separation of, yes, you can be all this bad, we're not gonna focus on that. We're gonna focus on the agreement, housing, and that already, from my point of view, is kind of contradictory and shows some of the direction that this mayoralty can take through these years. So, let's continue.
Chummy? What was going through your head when you were standing there?
I thought again and again about what it would mean for New Yorkers if we could establish a productive relationship that would focus on the issues that those New Yorkers stay up late at night thinking about. Because so often in our politics, we try and tell people what they should be worried about, what they should be concerned about. But when you actually ask New Yorkers and you listen to them, you hear it come back to the issues that animated not just the conversation the president and I had with the press after our meeting, but frankly in the meeting itself. It was a conversation where we spoke about the need to deliver on this agenda. And I appreciated that when we had that meeting, it wasn't.
Okay, so let's go to that part first. And again, here, this idea of what are the reasons of why people cannot sleep at night. And we can all agree, because that's my situation too. Low wages, the fear of missing some days out so that then you cannot make ends meet, knowing that my rent is gonna be more expensive next year, no matter what. That I had to move, I think 4 or 5 times in 6 years because of the how apartments falling apart, flooding issues. The landlords are terrible. I used to work at UPS. I'm a warehouse worker now in a different place. Wages I don't make ends meet. So, and the same with healthcare, the lack of access to education. So I share the same sentiment of these things that don't let me sleep at night. But it's not only that. I think the rhetoric goes very towards that line, even though other topics are brought up. But many times in this way, it's very focused on the economic issues, as if that wouldn't have a broader social impact. And if people were not thinking broader issues, when we, I was saying that immigrant families don't know if their loved ones are going to be deported. That's taking the same amount of sleep every night or even more. You can struggle and find ways to survive, to make ends meet. But once your loved one is deported, that's a very difficult issue and hard to resolve. And now, you can be sent to any country, to any jail. The threat is going against the abortion rights, against queer rights. So, like, what's going on in Palestine, there are so many issues that don't let people sleep at night, that goes beyond economy. Like, yes, it's very important. I just went to the groceries and I had to buy half of the thing that I was expecting. So, yes, affordability is an urgency, but at the same time, there are so many other things that don't let us sleep, and Trump is better responsible of all of them. So, this idea of working together, finding common agreements, it's not shying away differences, because it is an ideological debate, but it is policies that is being enacted right now, and the consequences are now. So it's not like, oh, we set aside differences, we go in agreements. It's someone that we need to fight back and do as much as possible to stop his attacks, and even go further in organizing and being ready to defend our communities. So the approach, I think it should be totally different. Like, if people from Venezuela who immigrated here, not only they're being threatened to be sent back to their country, but also their country is being threatened to be invaded by the US, or attacked or bombed. We don't know. So we cannot separate those things.
Wasn't just in the Oval Office. He also took me into the cabinet room, and there we were looking at portraits of presidents of years gone by, and we admired a portrait of FDR. And in many ways, when I think about the candidacy that we've put forward, it looks to Fiorello LaGuardia as the greatest mayor in New York City history. You can't tell the story of LaGuardia without telling the story of FDR, and the story of a relationship with the federal government that finally delivered at the scale of the crisis it was facing.
Well, prior to
Here, it will deserve a longer conversation, and I will try to keep it short. But I think here, trying to sum it up, the 30s is not the same that 2020. It's good to do analogies. It's good to, put together different moments to understand the dynamics, to find models, to look for references. The 30s, despite was a huge economic crisis, overall it was a moment in which the US was growing as an imperialist power. It was a period between the two wars. It has to confront the rise of revolution, the Soviet Union, revolutionary processes in Europe, like the Spanish Civil War, revolutions in attempts in Germany, a lot of things going on in Latin America. So It was a very different moment in which the 30s in the US were also very active of the working class and oppressed. Like a strong militancy, labor was in the rise, a lot of new organizing independent of the top labor bureaucracies. The So there was a lot of uh, labor containment. So instead of encouraging class struggle, FDR and La Guardia had these policies of co-opt and contain and let the US, be able to focus not so much in internal issues, but what was going on outwards. And so there are a lot of limits. Like, for example, La Guardia said that he was a union guy. He wanted 100% New York City unionized. But that was not true. He was totally against organizing and unions on the public sector. Many strikes that happened under his government, he opposed them. So it was always this dynamic of giving rights, but more to co-opt and contain as part of preparing the US for bigger fights with other countries and with all the social movement that were going on, than an expansion on democratic rights just because of good intention. And the US right now is in a different moment where the imperialist power is in decay, is having more difficulties to impose their wills, to impose economic sanctions, to uh, decide on the future of war. So it's a moment where the US is in a more complicated situation than in the 30s. And Trump is coming with a whole different agenda. So it's a different moment, and I will not uh, avoid mentioning the very problems that La Guardia had. Just I want to show this for a second. I wrote this article in the voice, that shows that, I don't want to go deep on this, but you can go to our website, check this article and why La Guardia we don't consider is a model for the left. And as I said here, La Guardia's legacy is one of cooptation and shoring up capitalism. This photo that we chose is, for example, La Guardia sending the NYPD against a protest. There was a Nazi rally held in Madison Square in 1939, which, fascism was rising in those days. And Trotsky's called for this mobilization, this protest that was joined by, 30,000 people. And La Guardia not only allowed them to do this rally in Madison Square Garden, but provide the security for the event. So this cannot be a model, especially with all the threats of the far right and the rise of the far right in other countries too. So, in this article, also I expand on the labor containment and non-class struggle, the contradictions of class collaboration versus class independence. And I think here, to sum it up and not spend too much on this, drawing lessons from La Guardia means administering the capital state, using mass movement as leverage in the balance of forces with city capitalists, and winning minimal reform and defending aspects of the welfare state. And this is much of what we're going to see in this interview and probably through these 4 years. That is how to administer the capital state, which gives the idea that the state, can be used more in favor of a sector, like depending on who is in charge, where the tools can go. So, and have the knowledge that this is a capital state, and you have to govern the forces that make this to be capitalism. So this contradiction of govern the state as it is versus challenging the state and the role of the capitalist state, contradiction between classes, etc. Well, that's a much longer discussion, but it's part of the debates on the left of what the role of the state, what can we do, why, revolution is going to happen much later. By now, we use the state as much as we can in our favor, and if we administer it and do alliances, even with sectors of the far right, we can deliver for the working class and make them gain confidence. But definitely, that's not the way. And we're gonna talk about it.
Your meeting. I don't have to tell you this. President Trump repeatedly threatened to cut off federal funding to New York if you won. The president seemed to back away from that yesterday, though, in his public comments in that joint news conference that you all did. He said, I don't think that's going to happen. I expect to be helping him, not hurting him. Do you believe him when he says that?
No, I believe the president in the conversation that we had.
I believe the president. That one is crazy. But I will let this go a little more.
And I will continue to make the case, both to the president and to the country at large, about the needs of New Yorkers. Because what I found, frankly, is that New Yorkers have grown tired of being asked to believe in a system that has delivered very little for them. They're tired of a politics that expects everything from them while delivering little. And
okay, because he's moving forward. So going back to the question, if Trump promised to not send troops to New York City, or be more aggressive towards his administration, etc. So I think also for larger context, and also why a different approach would have made more sense on this, is to think, where Trump is right now. Trump is coming, even though he changed it a little, from his worst weeks in government. The promise of bringing peace, it's not working. The conflict between Ukraine and Russia continues, like it's still war. Both sides are still sending missiles to each other, and it's in a very difficult situation. And so far, Trump hasn't achieved his goals. There is no any kind of ceasefire type negotiation, and the last offers that Trump has been doing involves Ukraine to concede a lot, and concede terrain, give resources to the US, pay back the military support with minerals. So a lot of still, the US is trying to take advantage of this, gain something, and continue making Ukraine a semi-colonial country that actually depends a lot on the US and is deepening its imperialist penetration. And what's going on in Israel and Gaza, this ceasefire that is very weak, that is fragile, which we don't call it a peace deal because this is far from peace. First, because Israel continue to kill Palestinian people despite the ceasefire, and it's not peace because this is not changing anything in the sense of Gaza continues to be occupied. This is actually expanding on the colonization and the occupation. So far, it's letting Israel to continue having the blockade, and this is even deeper into Gaza, not as before October 7. So this is legitimizing a lot of the occupation and the advances that Israel has done in Gaza, and still is not giving the Palestinian people the right to self-determination and for themselves to decide what's the next path to take, and is threatening to bring an imperialist force to contain peace, which is the US, the British. It's also negotiating with Arab countries and countries from the region who their leaderships never cared about Palestinian people, and now they are trying to see how they can take a piece of the cake with the reconstruction plans for Gaza. So it's very, always for them, Palestine has been a currency to exchange and to negotiate with the US and Israel. So all that is fragile. The killings continue, and it will not be a surprise to see Israel reinitiating the genocide in its worst form again. Republicans and Trump were leading with the shutdown that ended because all the role of the Democrats. Both of them were using working class people against each other, seeing who could stand more than the other, where the working classes working conditions and living conditions and getting worse and worse. But the shutdown was already having a toll on Trump's government. We could see that on the low polls that Trump is having. Trump is having less support. It's like it's a historical, it's very low. And few times in history has been worse than this. And especially he's losing support in terms of the economy, which was his main strength to be elected. It's also combined with the Epstein files crisis, with the MAGA crisis, the divisions, all the crises that he's having in his own base. The tariff is also not working. He's having a lot of pushback, even from the Supreme Court and federal court that are saying that what he's doing, is not in terms of procedure, etc., but out of his hands, and that should pass through the Congress. So limiting the more Bonapartist or executive power that Trump was using to manage all these tariffs. So, and a lot of back and forward. The tariffs against China work halfway. So also nobody seeing progress on that or the benefits of that. So it's hard to sell to the working class something that not even from a bourgeois perspective seems to be working. And the biggest blow was the result in the recent elections from, Trump said he was not in the ballot, but he actually was in the ballot. And in a lot of the elections from the in California, that the one, they are trying to do the same thing that Republicans are doing in Texas, that is to redraw the division so that then they can change the map so that then it's favorable to the Democratic Party, to elections in Virginia and New Jersey. And the fact that I think especially the one in New Jersey, it was not working, this idea of, if you don't agree with my politics, I will cancel projects. I will not send federal funds. I will pull out this money. Because the fact that he was, I think it's already terminated, but the idea of having this construction tunnel to in New Jersey with New York, the fact that that was a stop, and it's a stop as a punishment or as a threaten or to fight Democrats, then people is seeing that, oh, but the ones who are being hurt is the everyday people. People needs those infrastructure improvements and having easier way of transport, etc. So Trump already realized, one, that he lost the narrative on he being the one fighting for affordability against the inflation and how expensive it's becoming um, the cost of living. Now that narrative, is being appropriated by Democrats and especially by Zohran Mamdani. So I see in this meeting and a lot of that attempt of Trump jumping into discussion again of being him one that can take the the role of appearing as a affordability agenda, etc. So then saying that he was gonna cut federal funding to New York City would go quite against him. And also, it's a city where he has a lot of business. So I think there are a lot of reasons of why Trump is um, deciding not by now not to do these uh, federal cuts. What already happening in multiple other areas, but I think in a more aggressive line, Trump is seeing that now it's not going to work for him and the Republicans. Maybe he finds a different moment to do it, not now, but the explanation is different. It's not because they both agree in the affordable agenda or whatever.
And what they want now is a politics that can see the scale of the crisis in front of it and actually start to work together to deliver on that crisis.
You ran a campaign, though, saying that President Trump had not delivered on his promise of affordability. Did anything that happened in that meeting make you think, yes, he can deliver on that promise for Americans, for New Yorkers?
Well, I spoke to the president about the fact that while our campaign technically began on October 23rd last year, for many people, they became aware of it after the president won his election. And when I went out and spoke to New Yorkers, asking them who did they vote for and why, in two neighborhoods that swung most significantly towards the president. This was Fordham Road in the Bronx, Hillside Avenue in Queens. And I shared with the president that when I asked those New Yorkers why did they vote for the president, they told me again and again it was cost of living, cost of living, cost of living. And when the president and I were speaking, we were speaking about what is preventing from delivering on that affordability agenda. Sometimes it's a lack of taking on the broken system that we have. And I spoke about in New York City, for example, zoning regulations. We spoke about ULURP. This is a process by which you either approve or deny zoning changes that are made in New York City. We spoke about the need to change so many of those situations such that a developer doesn't tell you the thing more expensive than labor or materials is waiting. And we also spoke about the importance of understanding what it is that hurts New Yorkers in their pockets. It's their rent, it's their childcare, it's their utilities, and it's their childcare. Because the childcare, I say twice, because it is the second highest cost after housing, $22,500 a year for a single child.
Well, let me.
I know. So far, it's only 4 minutes of the interview, and but again, here it's true. There was these videos that I found very interesting that he did in Queens, asking why people voted for Trump, and cost of living came a lot. Also, the genocide came a lot. The need to stop funding Israel, etc. But I think it's related to what I was saying before about affordability, but there are other issues. But also, it was a punishment to Democrats, or seeing that Democrats are not solving these issues and they're kind of gaslighting people. And Democrats are Democrats. They also govern for the billionaire. They are also imperialists. They also put money in wars. So people was tired of that. Was tired of the status quo. Was tired of Biden being more of the same. So this was also a rejection to the Democrats. That happens because it's a bipartisan system. There is only two options. A lot of people didn't vote, and others went to Trump. So some sector might have thought that he could deliver in the economy, in the cost of living, but he already has been in government for 4 years, and that didn't happen. So I think that is also a matter of saying, you know, Democrats continue to fail people, and we are tired of this party. And because there are no other options, we are going with this one. And I think it's something that we should not underplay. Um, because then also that speaks to our strategy if we want to bring back people to the Democratic Party or go in a different direction. Sorry. So then about housing, it's bring up very shortly here. That is a large campaign and explanation, but the focus in this one that has few minutes to talk is the regulations. It's not BlackRock. It's not the landlords. It's not a landlord who owns thousands of buildings or apartments. The amount of empty spaces, all how housing is a business that look for profit instead of a human right, become a place that is seen safe for investment. How BlackRock then can do all these um, calculations, maneuvers, raising rent, lowering rent, buying hundreds of apartments altogether, then selling them again and do whatever they want because they have so much money. So housing is a sector of speculation and where rich people is doing crazy business. So the tone is not going against them to take over the empty spaces, to take over or stop landlords from having multiple, over I don't know how many houses, apartments. So already there is a shift, and I think that is this something that Ezra Klein and other Democrats are taking up with the abundance movement. Also has to have this speech of the problems are the regulations. If we regulate things different, still the market is going to be the one who's going to solve this issue. Plus the state creating new housing, a combination of the two things, instead of having an aggressive plan for housing construction where workers has and communities have something to say that can be run by by workers and communities and not left in hands of the rich, of the landlords, and so that the community is also part of this. And that's not so much the spirit. It's like how to figure out regulations so that then private business can act faster or cheaper and contribute to solve the crisis when they are the responsible of where we are now.
Let me ask you about the other threat that we heard from President Trump to send troops to New York City to address issues of crime and immigration. We've seen him do this in other major cities. Did you get any assurances in your meeting, Mayor-elect Mamdani, that President Trump will not send troops into New York?
I told the president that the cornerstone of an affordability agenda is public safety, and that it is critically important to me. And for all that has been said and all that has been spoken about, and the tens of millions of dollars looking to make New Yorkers fearful of that question, the truth of it is, in fact, that I'm looking forward to working with the NYPD to deliver on that. And I shared with the president that my decision to retain Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch is in large part a recognition of the fact that in her time leading the NYPD, she has driven down crime across the 5 boroughs while starting to uproot corruption that was endemic in the top echelons of that department under Mayor Adams.
And I'm going to follow up with you on your decision to keep Commissioner Tisch. But to this core question that I think so
she's going to follow up, and they're going to talk more about this later. But, just to mention it now, when she says, if Trump promised, he ignores that, but I would have said something. I completely reject any kind of sending troops, because then he will say later that he trusts NYPD, so you do not need to send troops. Like, you don't have to send troops, period. No, there's no more discussion on that. And we're going to fight back against any troops interfering in the United States and abroad. So this is already, a softer speech. And Jessica Tisch, eh, you know, she's a thing. This is also an article that I wrote for Left Voice. Trump, far right people figures has applaud this decision, and just to have an idea. Jessica Tisch is deeply embedded in the city's status quo. She comes from one of the wealthiest families in the United States, including like her family opposed and put money against Zohran's campaign. And she's a very strong Zionist who has been putting, pro-Palestine activism and anti-Semitism in the same, confusing these things, and being very against the pro-Palestinian movement. She has been part of the repressions at campuses, at what happens on CUNY on May 8, where students, journalists, teachers has been arrested or repressed. She knew about the ICE crackdown against immigrants in Canal Street. She's very far right and a Zionist and against Palestinian people and against the Palestinian movement. And the fact that, he's having all this pro NYPD speech, this is so different from what I think people was expecting. And this has come not only now, but already through the campaign. He was doing a lot of concession to the NYPD, who, is a racist institution, who defends the rich, who defends private property, capitalist, and repress workers, repress marches. It's a sector that's going to be against us while we fight for all these demands that are very important.
So many New Yorkers are curious to know the answer to. What did President Trump say to you? Did he assure you he will not send troops into New York?
He told me that he cared deeply about public safety. I said I cared
But
deeply
did he
about
say he
the same.
wouldn't send troops?
What I told him is that what separates New York City.
So when Trump said that he cares about safety, he said, me too. Trump doesn't care about safety. He cares about repression, policing, surveillance, crashing movements, like not the safety that we are talking about.
City from anywhere else in the country is we have the NYPD, and I trust the NYPD to deliver public safety. And to me, that is something that I know that they can do, that they have.
So already is Trump has been sending the federal troops in multiple places to fight crime and to fight bad immigrants. I don't need them. I have NYPD. And that's a difference compared to other states. So are you saying, first, that NYPD can play that role, so we can do it ourselves? Second, in the other states, Chicago, Portland, cities and states, Chicago, Portland, LA, California, North Carolina, okay, they don't have NYPD, so Trump has to send troops. That's not the discourse. It's like there should not be intervention of the federal troops, and it's false. That is for public safety and searching criminals. They are harassing black and brown people, profiling people, stopping in the most brutal ways to chase immigrants, undocumented people. Like, it has nothing to do, and it's people armed to the teeth walking in our streets. So the same, I don't like this type of answer, which all is in the kind of the typical politician move.
Have done, and they will continue to do under my leadership.
So he didn't rule it out in your meeting?
I made it very clear what we wanted to do was to deliver public safety and affordability, and the NYPD would be the ones to do so.
In that press conference with President Trump, a reporter asked you whether you believe that President Trump is in fact a fascist, a word that you've used in the past. You were about to answer, then President Trump sort of jumped in and he said, quote, "That's okay, you can just say yes. It's easier than explaining it." So Mr. Mayor-elect, just to be very clear, do you think that President Trump is a fascist?
And after President Trump said that, I said yes. And
so you do?
And that's something that I've said in the past. I say it today. And I think what I appreciated about the conversation that I had with the president was that we were not shy about the places of disagreement, about the politics that has brought us to this moment. And we also wanted to focus on what it could look like to deliver on a shared analysis of an affordability crisis for New Yorkers.
Two things. So you cannot call someone a fascist and then agree on housing. That doesn't make sense. Is someone a fascist is someone who is putting in or threatening all aspects of the bourgeois democracy and the democratic rights that people has. And Trump is, empowering eyes, all the things I have already mentioned. So we cannot say that. At least it doesn't make sense to me. And then this issue of calling Trump a fascist, if it is a fascist regime or not, it's up to discussion. But it's used as a way to say he's a fascist, he's threatening our democracy, you have to vote Democrats. But then when he's a fascist and we have to stop him, then we have agreements, we have teaming up, we have working an agenda that we agree of. And so it's used to make the Democrats look better, but then when it's time to fight back, then we can actually work together. So people say, oh, he called him fascist to his face. When he was asked that, he was already getting ready to give those loosey responses, and Trump was like, I don't care, just say it, who cares? Like, it's something that doesn't bother him at all. And after Trump said you can say it, then he said that. But historical analogies are important. Think in fascists, think in those main figures. Would you work? Would you team up? Will you sit down to talk, to find common agreements, or you will be fighting against them with all your passion and heart? I tend to think that far right fascists should be fight with the working class, with strikes, with movements in the streets, class struggle, not with this kind of soft conversations and finding the common ground and all that.
You've also said in the past that President Trump has engaged in a, quote, attack on our democracy. You've called him a despot. Do you still believe President Trump is a threat to the democracy?
Everything that I've said in the past, I continue to believe. And that's the thing that I think is important in our politics, is that we don't shy away from where we have disagreements, but we understand what it is that brings us to that table. Because I'm not coming into the Oval Office to make a point or make a stand. I'm coming in there to deliver for New Yorkers. And a few weeks ago, I was asked by a reporter 3 words to describe myself. I said, New York City. And that's what animated that conversation. How do we deliver for the people of New York City?
I think that some of your supporters would be curious to know, you say you stand by your past statements that, yes, he's a threat to the democracy. How do you square working with someone who you still think is a threat to the democracy?
I think working for the people of New York City demands that you work with everyone and anyone, and that you always look to find those areas of agreement while not overlooking the places of disagreement. And I think this was something that came up in our meeting. We spoke about immigration. We spoke about the fact that in New York City, we have sanctuary city policies that allow for the city to work with the federal government on around 170 serious crimes. The concern for so many New Yorkers comes about anything beyond that. And I spoke about the importance of us being able to protect New Yorkers and some of the incidents that we see.
I'm going to work for
you raised the issue of sanctuary cities, so I want to speak to you more broadly about the issue of immigration. This is one that is so critical to New York, the rest of the country as well. One of your top supporters, Senator Bernie Sanders, recently weighed in on President Trump's record managing the border. He compared it to former President Biden. I want you to take a listen to what he had to say. I'll get your reaction on the other side.
Today I choose us how to screen for colon cancer. Give me Cologuard.
Excuse me? You just need a prescription.
Sorry for that.
Cologuard is for people 45 plus at average risk, not high risk. False positive and negative results may occur. Ask your provider for Cologuard.
Trump did a better job. I don't like Trump, but we should have a secure border, and it ain't that hard to do. Biden didn't do it. Those before him
Secure
did not do it.
border.
We should have a secure border, period.
Do you agree with Senator Bernie Sanders?
Sanders has always been weak in this issue. Secure border means militarized border, means stronger laws. And misses the point. If people is coming to the US, is most of the time is because the living conditions in the respective countries become unbearable. And most of the times, the situations in those countries has worsened and worsened through time because of US policies, because the US attacking those countries, supporting coups, changing the administration, taking out the resources, having other companies through Latin America and bringing the resources here. So year of exploitation, spoliation. So tackling the discussion of immigration around border security has nothing to do, with being a socialist. And I think, that has been always been one of the weakest points of Bernie Sanders, and kind of also set the tone that Mamdani then avoids.
He's done a better job securing the border than former President Biden.
I haven't thought much about comparing presidents on the question of securing the border. I think it's important that it's secure, and I also think it's important that we have an immigration system that is humane. And that's what I spoke about with the president, is that New Yorkers want to see humanity in the policies that are being implemented.
Do you give President Trump some credit for the work that he's done to make the border, in Senator Sanders' estimation, more secure?
What I give President Trump credit for is the meeting that we had yesterday was one that was focused on how we could work together for New Yorkers. And the place that we could do so most effectively, frankly, is ensuring every New Yorker can afford the city they call home.
Well, you take me to my next question, which is about really the central issue of your campaign, affordability. You have said that you want to raise $9 billion in new taxes, increasing taxes on the wealthy, on businesses, in order to fund your key policies like universal child care, which you mentioned. You would need Governor Kathy Hochul to be on board with this. You'd need her signature. She has never publicly committed to increasing taxes. I know you just spoke with her. Mr. Mayor-elect, did Governor Hochul commit to you that she will support and sign on to your plan to increase taxes?
The governor and I had a productive conversation, and what we both committed to is working together for the affordability agenda. And one thing I appreciate.
So do you imagine that you can work with Hochul for affordability agenda? Like, Trump and Hochul are not new people. They were not elected 2 weeks ago. They are part of the establishment. They are part of, Trump in a different way. So both defend, the system, both defend the rich. They are against any kind of taxes. So how you can reach again agreements first with Trump and now with Hochul? For some people, this is the master class of a negotiation and a long-term strategy and a chess maneuver tactic. Or actually, this is starting to concede sector of the establishment and sector of the capitalists, of the rich.
Of the many about Governor Hochul is that she's been focused not just on affordability, but specifically on universal child care for quite some time. And now is the time to bring a partner forward in City Hall. And I've said plainly and openly that I believe that these are two tax proposals that make sense, increasing the personal income taxes on New Yorkers making $1 million or more by just 2%, increasing the top corporate tax rate to match that of New Jersey. And what I've also said is more important than how we fund something is that we fund something. And if there are additional or alternate revenue streams to do so, I will accept them and I will celebrate them.
To avoid
the most
tax the
important
rich.
thing is to actually deliver for the New Yorkers who right now can't even conceive of having a family in New York City because of how expensive we've made childcare across the 5 boroughs.
Well, and your entire agenda is incredibly ambitious: universal child care, free buses, among other things, lowering rent. Can you deliver on this agenda without Governor Hochul agreeing to increase taxes?
Well, I'm thankful that I'm not going to have to engage in the hypothetical, because I am confident of the two of us working together to deliver on this agenda and ensure that finally, and this goes back to just that portrait of FDR, we look at what politics has been in the past. It has been there in the moments of such transformation, meeting the scale of the crisis. We can do that again.
So just yes or no, you think she'll raise taxes?
I think she'll work with me to deliver on affordability. I think raising taxes make the most sense. If there's any alternative that raises the same amount of money, I'm open.
All right, let's talk about another major issue, which you referenced: policing.
So many major issues.
Crime. There are a lot of major issues, I know. 5 years ago, you were calling for defunding the police. Now you are in charge of the largest police department.
In those days was the Black Lives Matter movement, the murder of George Floyd by the police. And here in New York City, the budget was $6 billion. So there were movements to defund. I think we should defund it to zero. But there were people saying they should get less money. And that's when he called the police. Police racist, too many, money needs to be defunded, etc. But his opinions have shift, as we see clearly here.
In the country, you have tapped Commissioner Jessica Tisch to stay on in her job. She has accepted. She wants to put thousands more police officers on the streets of New York. Will you do that, Mr. Mayor-elect?
I've said over the course of the campaign that I think the number we have had budgeted of 35,000 officers is a sufficient number.
35,000 is not a lot. It's not exceeding. It's not making our subways be full of cops who are harassing unhoused people, who are harassing anyone who jump and avoid the $3. Fair. No, we don't have too many of them. We have sufficient. This is already saying, I'm not gonna span. I'm gonna choose the person who wants to span, but I don't want to span. And I think what we have is not. I think it's one of the most militarized police forces in the world. It's not the biggest police force in the United States. Probably it's also the biggest police force across the world. So it's not sufficient. It's kind of like a lot. And it's part of keeping, this is, of course, the role of the police is not to fight crime. The role is to maintain the status quo, to squash movements, to prevent, protests of achieving their goals, to defend the rich. So, here is a very, very far from previous statements that he has been doing. He wasn't, not that to the left, but, now he's full with the YPD.
What we have to do, however, is allow those officers to focus on policing. What I mean by that is that in 2020, the response time for the NYPD was less than 11 minutes. Today, it's closer to 16 minutes. A large part of that is because officers are now having to deal with 200,000 mental health calls a year. And so our proposal is create a Department of Community Safety, task it with the mental health crisis, the homelessness crisis, and allow officers to focus on serious crimes so we can get back to the work of delivering on this, as opposed to being trapped in a political discourse without addressing the systemic crisis.
But violent crime is substantially down under Commissioner Tisch's watch. Do you acknowledge that her approach is working, and therefore do you need to listen to her when she says, I need more cops on the street?
The reason I made the decision to retain Commissioner Tisch is because of the importance of outcomes. The fact that she has been able to deliver on rooting out corruption while lowering crime is something to be celebrated.
And here, same. You can go to the article that we published on The Voice, but she was elected by Eric Adams. And these years of Eric Adams, there has been corruption everywhere. And there has been an increase of the police force. There has been brutal repression from, the scenes that we saw at the Columbia encampment, at the CUNY encampment, both in solidarity with Palestine, brutally repressed, like young students. And at the protests, especially the pro-Palestinian organizations, brutally repressed, and all this is under Eric Adams and the last year under Tisch. So corruption continues, and she was chosen by someone who's corrupted, who's a corrupt, uh, and has been administration very against protests and very against the right to, oppose a genocide. So I don't know. I think, and this idea that if crime goes down is because the amount of police in the streets. It doesn't have to do with inequality, with terrible living conditions, with there are so many problems, and because this logic looks like, oh, Tish, she continues, and cops do their job, crime will lower, and the response is more police, jails, arresting. It's like this doesn't also, it's far from a socialist left or even a abolitionist perspective. It's like a very pro police statements.
And I think the commissioner and I have been very clear that what brings us together is a shared importance of public safety. I think we can do that with the officers we have.
Would you rule out putting more police officers on the street?
What I will tell you is that the 35,000 we have budgeted, that's the amount that I think we need.
Okay. Let me ask you, again, just going back to that press conference with President Trump, as reporters were leaving, you were answering a question that I think was hard for a lot of people to hear about your response to protests outside of a Manhattan synagogue. Your initial response to that incident did receive some criticism, as you know. What is your message to Jewish New Yorkers who feel you won't be tough enough in your response to anti-Semitic incidents?
That I'm looking forward to being the next mayor of New York City and fulfilling the commitment I've made to Jewish New Yorkers over the course of this campaign, which is a commitment to not only protect them across the 5 boroughs, but to celebrate and cherish them. And what that looks like is rooting out anti-Semitism. It looks like increasing funding for hate crime prevention programs by 800%. And it also looks like ensuring that we have...
And, I'm sorry, I cut off the
NYPD protection.
Oh, yes. So here the same. The way we have to fight against anti-Semitism. And, it's a serious concern. The response cannot be in the NYPD hands. And again, it's important to state the difference that fighting against Zionism, fighting the genocide going on in Palestine, the occupation, the siege, the blockade, all that is not anti-Semitic. It's a lot of Jewish people, especially in your city, the amount of Jewish folks that has gone out in support of Palestinian people has been overwhelming. So the press, the far right, we continue attempting to conflate the two things on their favor and promote an anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian, anti-protest rhetoric, and we have to be careful with that.
Outside of synagogues and temples, especially on the high holy days. And I want to just say, recently on Yom Kippur, there was a horrific anti-Semitic attack in Manchester. A rabbi in New York City reached out to me and said, could you ensure that there's additional police protection outside of the synagogue for today? I said, absolutely. And I also asked, what if that rabbi did not know the next mayor of New York City? We have to make it so that it doesn't matter who you know. It matters that you will get that safety and security because you're a New Yorker. That's the administration I'm going to put together.
All right. I do want to talk a little bit about the future of the Democratic Party. A number of Republicans are casting you as the face of the Democratic Party. Mr. Mayor-elect, I wonder, do you think that Democratic socialists can win across the country, in battleground states, for example?
I think a focus on the importance of dignity for working people is something that appeals to people across this country. I will not venture into the world of national politics and punditry, but what I will tell you is that in New York City, we saw so many of the same dynamics we'd seen elsewhere. We'd seen a shift towards the right. We'd seen obituaries being written about the Democratic Party's ability to speak to young people, to speak to Asian voters, speak especially to young men. And I actually shared this with the president, that the very constituencies that he had won over, that were a critical part of his increased vote share in New York City, were the ones that we then looked at as who we should focus on to bring back into the party. And I think that when you speak to those constituencies with the same respect you'd speak to any other, you will see that they will then engage in the process. We saw an increase in voter turnout amongst 18 to 29-year-olds by more than 300%. And that's because we spoke to them as New Yorkers who are facing an affordability crisis, not as young people we have to finger wag to participate in democracy.
Two more quick questions. If Democrats win the midterms, do you want to see Leader Jeffries become the Speaker of the House?
Yes.
Okay, that was a firm, quick answer. So you leave plenty of time for my final answer.
Don't let me go back and give a little more.
Look, former President Obama called you after your victory, and he offered to be a sounding board for you as you take on this role of mayor of New York City. What advice did he give you about how to lead effectively in these years ahead?
You know,
Okay, I don't remember what he responds here, but I think this already is enough illustration. And before I end the stream, I want to focus on this part of him endorsing Jeffries without any doubt. All the debate that has sparked on the DSA and progressive sector that are quite disappointed with this decision. And I think, there are multiple aspects to think. One is all the shift that Zohran has been doing to the center, these compromises with the sector of the establishment, him endorsing Hakeem Jeffries, all has to do with limits on the strategy, on the program, but really important, his connection with the Democratic Party. Because these decisions are not a one-person decision, a team decision. This is part of the core of the Democratic Party. As probably you already know, but the Democratic Party is known as the graveyard of the social movement. All the time, we make efforts to continue the status quo. The Democratic Party is entrenched to U.S. imperialism, to U.S. capitalism. So working inside the Democratic Party will bring you into these instances in which, the pressure, the alliances, their internal agreement moves you or traps you into accepting the rules of the status quo. Otherwise, I don't know how you can explain endorsing Jeffries, another Zionist, another person of the establishment, another responsible of the affordable crisis. Like, how? Someone who has not fight back against Trump. So the limits, we cannot separate, we fight for reforms and we do some tactics, and then in the future we fight for socialism. Because while you are doing this, you are doing alliances, you are working within a capitalist party, and all that brings contradictions. And if you don't address them and you are not open about it and start creating confusion, start creating disappointment, and not necessarily means that people will go even more to the left. Some people will be like, oh, you see, again, this hope is going back into a status quo. So that's why we think that the whole, big sector that has made this election possible, I don't remember the numbers, but 100,000 people who engage in some kind of canvassing, 10,000 people who join the DSA here in New York City, the excitement that goes way beyond these numbers that probably are 1 million people, the fact that socialism is again in discussions in people's minds. We should not bring those people again to the Democratic Party, again to this bipartisan system, and take advantage of this discussion on socialism to start thinking and organizing for a different organization. That is not the Republicans, it's not the Democratic Party, it is a socialist party. One, the working class that has a socialist program and is willing to confront the capitalist who has a vision of a different system, and is not going to be doing these alliances with sector of the bourgeoisie and of the establishment, but rather put all the efforts in organizing the working class, making the working class to be the center of the movement, not an auxiliary that can help you put pressure or get more votes or get more, I don't know, campaigns, money, whatever. But no, how the working class, through some methods of self-organization, taking decisions in their workplaces, in their neighborhoods, in their communities, can be, the seed of a different society. And for that, the working class has to be at the center, has to be the head of the movement. And we have to be clear who are our allies and who are our enemies. I know, Democratic Party, Republican Party, sounds basic, but they are our enemies. And who are the allies of the working class? We have seen the student movement, like what's going on in Italy. Italy went on a strike against the genocide. So you had workers going on strike at their workplaces, stopping everything. The movement is blocchiamo tutto, like shutting down everything, stopping the shipments of arms, and not letting things move in Italy. And they counted with the support of the student movement, who blocked things that maybe because of the unions leaderships, because of difficulties in organizing, the students and the youth came to block things. Italy has more unionized workers, but still it's not 100%. I think it's probably lower 30. So blocking highways, bridges will help those workers who doesn't have a union to be able to be part of the strike and use those blockades as a way of not going to work. So that's an alliance of the student movement and the workers movement fighting to stop the genocide and connecting our struggles, how the fight for Palestine means the fight against imperialism, against the country who has been sustaining the genocide, the occupation. So we have to, organize together with those allies and not go into alliances with our enemies, with people who, can be charming with you, but then as soon as they can, will squash you, squash the movement, squash all the good intention that someone could have. So to do that, we need a new political representation, which, is not easy, but, there are a lot of polls that shows how socialism is having a positive view among the youth. Sometimes it's a diffuse definition, is that, it's not, it's Finland socialism, it's a lot of welfare socialism, or is it society without exploiters and exploited people, in which, we are not forced to work so that we don't die, but our work is put into a collective decision of running a society, guaranteeing everyone the basic democratic rights, and also housing, food, education, healthcare, that is all provided by workers. So we could work freely, cooperating among each other to satisfy all these needs that we need and have space instead of working 12 hours, 14 hours, 6 days a week for creativity, to continue developing sciences. Like, the horizon is huge of the things that we could do under a socialist society. So we should bring that enthusiasm to larger ideas, a larger perspective. And that doesn't mean not to fight for reforms, because many times oh, you want to talk about ideology or a dream or the future, but the fight for abortion rights has seen a huge movement of women and other sectors in the streets. The fight against, back in time against the slavery, for the civil rights, the strike in the 30s. A lot of the gains it's not because we pressure politicians, it's because we movement is so strong that they need to give concessions, otherwise their governability is gonna be at risk. So there is a moment where there is what we call an organic crisis in the United States, where any of the two parties are showing the political representation that what people are looking for, and you have these kind of outsiders taking that space, but because it's a bipartisan system, there is no space to show that growth of to the left. And I think the election of Mamdani, despite his limits, is an expression of that, of a sector that is tired of the establishment, of the Democratic Party, of the attacks of the far right, and want to see something different. And it's not gonna come because we have the best team, which this is something that we didn't talk today, but the team, the transition team, is having already, especially in housing and education, there are a lot of contradictions that we could expand in a different life. But how we use this to fight for a different alternative, like breaking with the Democratic Party and put all the energies to build this new socialist party of the working class. And in that sense, the DSA, who has grown through the Zohran Mamdani's campaign, who has 10,000 new members in New York City, reaching 90,000 across the country, it has a specific responsibility to make this happen. The problem is the shortcomings of the program, but also if the idea was going to be to become electoral machine that works as a subsidiary to bring back people into the Democratic Party, to them being eaten up and being, losing against this imperialist machine that is the Democratic Party, or all those new members, all the youth that is having different aspiration, that is eager to fight the far right and be part of, the fight to improve our lives, is gonna have a new option, a new alternative that in the beginning, it's not gonna be easy. But all those numbers, all that forces, all that momentum, if we let it go into the Democratic Party, we are gonna see the same cycle. People will get disappointed, and the left is not gonna appear as an option. But if we show that there is a different alternative, there is a different path that is centered on the working class and the the movements in the streets, that we can fight for a socialist horizon and fight for demands, but with our own method of the strike, of self-organization, assemblies, community organizing, unity of unemployed with workers in democratic spaces, and we fight back, shutting down everything, revitalizing the labor movement, organizing our unions. There are some different perspective, and showing how socialism is an anti-capitalist perspective, that we don't want to live with Wall Street, that we want to end Wall Street, and all the resources and all the capacities of this city is going to be put in a much more bigger project, that is to end a society of exploitation that has is causing misery all over the globe. And we have this idea, New York City, that is climate change. We cannot think only in New York City. There are tendencies toward the armament, there are tendencies towards war, there are more military intervention. We cannot go into the local issue and okay, what happens? I wish us focus here. No, we have to have a comprehensive program that will solve or fight for solving those contradictions. So I think this is also an invitation for everyone who's interested in breaking with the Democratic Party and putting efforts and energy in a whole different project of our own party, a socialist party of the working class, in which we fight independently of any capitalist and bourgeois tendencies, and I believe, and we in Left Voice believe that I can show this. We have a declaration that we have put in this case, that it's time for a decisive step towards socialist working class party. DSA must break with the Democratic Party. And here, that is a much more developed explanation from the one that I just did. So I invite you to read that, leave some comments, let me know what you think about this stream, if there are other political topics that you would like me to address. If at some point I also want to invite people to join, to engage in debates, and use this live stream as a space to discuss, debate, and share opinions. So subscribe, leave comments, and hopefully see you next time.